Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. Confess that, in all my years, beside the inimitable Hercule Poirot, nothing quite prepared me for the curious case of the harp's last note. It was on a luminous autumn afternoon, when the London air had taken on that peculiar crispness which augurs both rain and revelation. I had scarcely set foot in his little sitting-room off Green Street before Poirot's tiny mustachios bristled with excitement. Mon ami Hastings. He began, tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail against the rim of his teacup. Today we attend the residence of Lady Madeleine Delacroix. A crime most unusual has occurred. I raised an eyebrow. A crime, you say? But this is a lady, renowned for her soirees and harmless musical diversions, not sordid affairs. Poirot smiled, the corners of his eyes dancing. Precisely why it fascinates me. The crime is not yet widely known, or I expect Scotland Yard would have seized upon it already, but I have been summoned, privately. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. A murder or something very like it took place within Lady Delacroix's renowned music room. The principal witness, the harp, the harp. I repeated, skepticism colouring my tone. Surely you jest. Poirot shook his head solemnly. Not at all. The harp uttered one specific last notan, a flat that no one else heard. It was a musical cry for help, which points to malice. Most cunning, I choked on my tea. Musical cry for help. Surely Lady Delacroix's harp is no pole-like messenger. Ah, but you see, Hastings, in the world of sound, there is subtlety unavailable to the ear accustomed only to the spoken word. Consider this. The harpist, Signora Lucia Marini, collapsed at the very moment she struck that final chord, and died on the spot. The coroner's report is inconclusive. No wound, no poison detected. Yet Signora Marini was a strong woman, hale of body and mind. I tried to picture the scene. A grand Georgian manor, walls panelled with walnut, afternoon light slanting through mullioned windows onto a gilded harp. Then what you propose, Poirot, is that this final flat was deliberately struck to signal her peril, mon Dieu, yes. But more than signal perhaps, it was the instrument itself that delivered the fatal blow. He tapped his forehead, or led us to the method. In any case, the circumstances demand our attention. I have ordered the carriage for 4 o'clock. Lady Delacroix expects me at precisely past. He rose, smoothing the front of his immaculate frock-coat. I followed suit, curiosity and unease warring within me. A harp that kills with a note, surely this must be an ingenious hoax, or the workings of an analytical mind far subtler than mine. By 4:30 we drew up before Delacroix Manor. Ivy crawled over the brick facade, and 2 busts of composers Bach and Mozart flanked the front door. We were greeted by Lady Madeleine herself, a statuesque woman in black silk, her dark hair swept into a severe chignon. She offered the slightest of smile. Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings, I am so grateful you could come. Her voice held tremors I had not detected in correspondence. Please forgive the intrusion of tragedy into my humble home. Lady Delacroix. Poirot inclined his head courteously. It is I who am honoured. Please guide us to the music room. She led the way. Down a corridor hung with oil paintings of ancestors in powdered wigs. The rich scent of rosewood and orange blossoms lingered in the air as the door to the music room swung open, revealing the scene of Signora Marini's final performance. Chapter 2. The First Closes. The heavy oak door to the music room creaked. Open, I followed Poirot's trim figure into a chamber awash with late afternoon light. The tall windows on the east wall were draped in burgundy velvet, their tassels swaying ever so slightly despite the stillness of the air. At the room's center stood the harp, its gleaming frame crowned with gilded scrollwork, yet the instrument's usual dignity was marred. A single chord resonated in memory, but now the strings sagged as if in mourning. Poirot moved with deliberate grace, his black loafers whispering against the polished parquet. He surveyed the scene with those keen, unblinking eyes of his. I, more clumsy of foot, nearly tripped over a fallen music stand, its brass hinges bent, and a scattering of sheet music lying face up on the carpet. Mon ami, Poirot murmured, notice these sheets. He pointed to the pale pages, each bearing the delicate notations of Chopin's etudes. One page was splattered with a tiny blot of dark red no, larger than a pinhead. I bent to examine it. Blood, I whispered. Poirot nodded. Just so. Yet the mark is small, suggesting a superficial cut rather than fatal violence. Perhaps Signora Marini pricked her finger in her haste or in distress. My eyes roved the room. An unattended violin case lay cracked open by a chaise longue. On the small mahogany table beside it rested a half-empty glass of burgundy wine. I approached and inhaled its bouquet. Uncannily sweet, I observed. Almost medicinal. Interesting. Poirot said, joining me. The wine is from Chateau Renaud, a fine vintage from 1919. But mon Dieu, who would serve a convalescing harpist such potent liquor just before a performance? And he paused to lift the glass by its stem. See here, a faint mark of lipstick on the rim. A woman's presence is indicated, although the glass lies as though abandoned in haste. I smoothed the silk skirt of Lady Delacroix, who had retreated to a window corner, arms folded. Her face was pale, but her composure remained statuesque. I poured the wine for Signora, she said, voice quivering only slightly. I left the room briefly to fetch her extra sheets of music. When I returned, she had fallen. Poirot lifted a single finger. Madame, did you notice any disturbance? Any sound other than the harp's final note? Lady Delacroix glanced at the harp's frame and pressed her lips. No, monsieur, only the note, and then a thud, as if heavy limbs hit the floor. Poirot nodded and turned to the western side of the room, by the fireplace. There, a plush armchair was overturned, its velvet torn. The hearth was cold, but the marble hearthstone bore a dark smudge, perhaps soot or grease. Beside it lay a small leather pouch, its clasp unfastened and empty. I picked up the pouch. This appears to have held coins, I said tentatively, peering inside. Now it is quite bare. Coins or pills? Poirot suggested. The shape could conceal any number of small items. I frowned. But why would Signora Marini carry pills? She was healthier than most women half her age. Poirot gave me a gentle smile. Precisely, Hastings. It is our duty to ascertain whether this pouch belonged to Signora Marini or someone else. You will note the monogram SM embossed in silver on its leather. I inspected the pouch more closely. Signora Marinesso, it was hers. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. Yet consider, I have learned that Signora Marini cared deeply for her appearance. Why would she keep a pouch of medication on her person during a recital? It suggests either a secret ailment or that the pouch was switched. My mind reeled. So many questions, and the answers lay hidden. Poirot drifted to the grand piano in the corner, its lid propped open. On its keys, a single white glove had been laid out, neatly, as if placed by careful hands. The glove was embroidered with tiny pearls along the cuff. "Notice," Poirot said, "this glove is left-handed, and yet Signora Marini used both hands with equal facility. Why would she discard one glove here? He held it between finger and thumb. Moreover, the glove is immaculate. No dust, no smudge. Whoever placed it here did so with great care, most ritualistically." I shivered at the thought of hidden ritual. Lady Delacroix moved to stand beside us, her voice a whisper. "That glove belongs to my daughter, Cecily. She often assists Signora Marini by turning pages." Madame Poirot inquired softly, "Where is Cecily now?" "She went to fetch fresh water for the wine," Lady Delacroix responded. "Perhaps she is still in the kitchen." Poirot inclined his head. "I shall speak with her in due course." He turned back to the harp. "And the harp itself. Observe the strings. The A-flat string here." He plucked the taut metal lightly. "It rings with unusual brightness, as though newly replaced. Yet the other strings bear the age-old patina of repeated use." I knelt to examine the harp's pedal board. One pedal was stiff, while the others depressed freely. I pressed the stiff pedal, and heard a faint scrape of metal. Perhaps a technician replaced this string before tonight's performance. I ventured, and tightened this pedal only for it to bind during the final note. "Perhaps." Poirot agreed. "But I would ask, who had access to the harp this afternoon? And why a new string for only one note? The answer lies not in chance, mon ami, but in design." From the doorway came the soft click of footsteps. We turned to see Inspector Leclerc of Scotland Yard advancing with his notebook. His uniform was impeccable, but his expression was grave. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are gathering your observations," Leclerc said. "The coroner insists that the death was natural, perhaps a heart condition. No poison traces, no signs of violence. Thus, legally, this is a tragic accident." Poirot bowed slightly. "Accidents do occur, Inspector, but we must not overlook the subtleties. A harp does not speak. The witness is silent. It is our task to listen to what it implies." Leclerc blinked at the harp as if it might reply, then raised an eyebrow. "I leave you to your musical forensics, monsieur." As the inspector withdrew, Poirot took out his notebook and penciled a few words. I caught sight of a line: "Poison. Odorless only at a flat string." I swallowed. "Poison, Poirot. You believe Signora Marini was murdered?" He looked up, those brilliant eyes. "I believe Signora Marini was killed. Hastings, whether by string, pedal, wine, or finger prick, one must probe further." He closed the notebook decisively. "We shall need to interview each person who entered this room today, including Cecily Delacroix, the housekeeper, and the lady herself." Lady Delacroix shuddered, but nodded. "Of course. Whatever it takes to uncover the truth." Poirot placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear, madame. We will untangle this web, stitch by stitch, until the murderer's thread reveals itself." As I helped Lady Delacroix steady herself, my eyes lingered on the harp's fallen sheet music, the smudge of red, the misplaced glove, and the empty pouch. Each was a fragment of a greater puzzle, one that would test Poirot's little grey cells as never before. And so, with hearts uneasy, we prepared to delve into the first layer of secrets concealed within Delacroix Manor. Chapter 3: The Gathering of Suspects. By the time dinner was served in the candlelit dining room, Poirot had arranged for every person who entered the music room that afternoon to assemble at the long mahogany table. The tension in the air was almost palpably guest aware that, beneath polite conversation and silver chatter, a murderer might be seated among them. At one end of the table sat Lady Madeleine Delacroix herself, still garbed in black silk, her expression composed but weary. She presided over the meeting with the dignity of a queen, though her wavering hand betrayed a deeper anxiety. To her right was her daughter, Miss Cecily Delacroix, a young woman of 24 whose bright eyes belied her mother's pallor. Cecily wore a simple ivory dress, her dark hair pinned back to reveal a delicate monogrammed bracelet, gift from Signora Marini after her last recital. Opposite Lady Delacroix sat Edward Graves, the butler. His posture was impeccable, his polished shoes tapping ever so lightly beneath the table. Graves had served the family for over 15 years. He knew every corridor and secret passage in the manor. Yet tonight his expression was guarded, his perfect composure suggesting he had much to conceal. Beside Graves was Mrs. Penrose, the housekeeper. A matronly woman in her 50s, she clutched a handkerchief edged with lace, her knitting set aside on her lap. Mrs. Penrose's loyalty to the Delacroix household was unquestionable, but her knitted brows hinted at worry perhaps for her beloved Signora, or perhaps for other, more private reasons. Next came Viscount Rupert Quilford, an enigmatic patron of the arts whose family fortune lay in coal and steel. The Viscount had arranged this private performance in honor of his latest charitable donation to Lady Delacroix's music scholarship. He wore a tailored suit of midnight blue, and his gloved hands tapped an uneven rhythm on the tabletop. His pale face was inscrutable, save for the flicker of impatience in his steel-grey eyes. Finally, there was Monsieur Marcel Lefebvre, a celebrated pianist and longtime friend and friendly rival of Signora Marini. With his slender frame and impeccable moustache, he looked every inch the artist. Yet side by side with his brilliance at the keyboard, he carried a simmering resentment. Signora Marini's reputation, some whispered, had recently begun to eclipse his own. Poirot cleared his throat and steepled his fingers. Madame et Messieurs, I thank you for your prompt attendance. You are here because each of you had occasion to enter the music room this afternoon, before the tragic collapse of Signora Marini. He paused to allow the weight of her absence to settle among them. It is our task to uncover, with logic and precision, the series of events that led to her demise. Lady Delacroix offered a trembling nod. I will answer whatever questions. You require Monsieur Poirot? Hastings exchanged a glance with Mrs. Penrose, then broke the silence. Miss Cecily, where were you at the moment Signora Marini fell? Cecily's throat quivered. I had just returned with the water, sir. I set the decanter on the round table by the harp and left at Lady Delacroix's request to fetch another set of music from my mother's salon. When I stepped back in, she was on the floor. Did you see anyone else in the room? Poirot asked softly. She hesitated. No, only Lady Delacroix and Signora Marini. But I heard a faint footstep behind me as I knelt beside her. Her voice caught. It paused, then retreated. Poirot's eyebrow rose. Thank you, mademoiselle. That is most helpful. He turned to the butler. Monsieur Graves, as the person responsible for the household staff, did you witness any unusual activity today? Graves bowed his head. I served tea to Lady Delacroix at 2:30, and I retrieved a fresh music stand at her request. I did not enter the music room again until the moment I was summoned after Signora Marini's collapse. Did you notice the pouch marked SM on the chaise longue? Poirot inquired, and Graves's expression flickered. Graves cleared his throat. The pouch belonged to Signora Marini, Monsieur Poudet. I found it there when I entered. I assumed she had retrieved it earlier, perhaps, for personal medication. Poirot nodded. Indeed. But did you see anyone handle it? Graves thought for a moment. No, monsieur. I confess, I did not look closely. My orders were to attend to Lady Delacroix. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Very well. He turned to Mrs. Penrose. Madame, were you present when the half-empty wine-glass was placed on the mahogany table? The housekeeper's face grew red. Yes, monsieur. I poured the wine at Lady Delacroix's request. Signora Marini requested the Chateau Renaud vintage. I departed immediately to attend to other duties in the kitchen. Did you remain in hearing distance of the music-room? Hastings asked. She dabbed at her eyes. Not deliberately, but I would have heard any commotion. She paused, then added in a trembling voice, I did think it odd the wine was stronger than usual, but I dared not question Lady Delacroix's choice. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, Madame Penrose. Your candour is appreciated. He moved on to Viscount Quilford. Your lordship, what brings you personally to this recital? The Viscount leaned forward, his voice low and measured. I came to support the arts. My family's endowment to the music scholarship is dear to my heart. Signora Marini was the finest harpist I have heard in 20 years. I would not have missed tonight's performance. Did you approach the harp at any point today? Poirot pressed. The Viscount hesitated, then said, only to congratulate Signora Marini after practice. I placed a coin in the silver offering box at the doorway and retreated for refreshments. Ah, the offering box, Poirot mused. But it appears the box was empty at the time of collapse. He locked eyes with Quilford. Is it possible you or someone of your acquaintance took the contents? Quilford's jaw tightened. I gave my donation directly to Lady Delacroix afterwards. My family's name on the plaque is quite sufficient memorial. Poirot allowed a moment's silence before turning to Monsieur Lefebvre. Maestro, you and Signora Marini have often performed together. Did you notice her demeanour this afternoon? Lefebvre ran a nervous hand through his hair. She seemed distracted, preoccupied. There was a moment, rehearsing the final chord, when her eyes darted toward the open window as if expecting someone. An open window, Poirot repeated, his eyes. A light, which leads to our next inquiry. Was any entry possible from outside? But more of that anon, Maestro. You left the room before the recital. Lefebvre nodded. Yes, I went to warm up at the piano. I do not recall who remained. Poirot closed his small notebook and surveyed the circle. Each of you has given us important fragments. There remain contradictions, footsteps, heard by Cecily, the half-empty glass, the missing coins, the unfamiliar glove, the stiff harp pedal. We now have a closed circle of suspects. None may leave Delacroix Manor until I have resolved the nature of this crime. Lady Delacroix's voice trembled as she rose. Then we await your questions, Monsieur Poirot. With that, Poirot tapped his fingertips together and smiled his most reassuring smile. Patience, madame. The little grey cells are already at work. As the servants withdrew, leaving only the suspects and us, I realized that this gathering so polite on the surface bristled with hidden tensions, each person holding secrets as tightly as the harp's strings. And it was within this tangled web that Poirot would find the true note of guilt. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives the next morning. Before the sun had fully cast its light over Delacroix Manor, Hercule Poirot summoned me to his chambers with a curt note. Dress warmly, Hastings. for some cells shall work in the crisp air. I found him arranging miniature vials on his dresser, each labelled with neat script. His precision was as astonishing in private as in public performance. "Mon ami," he said, without turning, "today I must make my arrival upon the scene of crime as though for the first time. We shall visit the music room again, observe our suspects in a new light, and gather impressions that escape the mundane investigator." He paused to select a dark violet tie, knotting it with exquisite symmetry. "First impressions are the lifeblood of detection." I followed him through the manor's echoing corridors, past doors heavy with carved initials, until we reached the music room. I noted that daylight revealed more than lamplit shadows. The burgundy drapes looked faded at their edges, and fine motes danced in the beams of sun filtering through the windows. Poirot paused at the threshold. "Observe, Hastings. The handprints on the harp's column are fresher than yesterday's residue. Someone touched it recently, perhaps to test the string or to frame an innocence." He ran a gloved finger along the ivory soundboard, then tapped the flat string lightly, still vibrant, not plucked since last night. The killer wished us to think otherwise. I knelt to inspect the floor. "Monsieur, footprints 2 sets. One of a small boot, one of a slipper. The slipper prints are Cecily's, I believe, but the boots, too narrow for Graves, too large for Quilford," he nodded. "Perhaps mine. No, my shoes are too polished. We shall catalogue these prints later." He stood and turned to the windows. "Tell me, Hastings, what do you see when you look beyond this pane?" I glanced out at the manicured gardens, dew clinging to rose petals. Only the stone balustrade and the labyrinth of boxwood hedges. Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Yet the chiffon scarf caught on that rosebush dew, you note the silk fibres." He pointed to a tangle of lavender thread, a clue to our visitor. Who entered through this window? No servant would risk such an obvious path. The killer moved swiftly. I straightened. But why enter through a window when the door was unlocked? And who would leave such fibres behind? "Questions," my friend Poirot replied, "to be answered in proper time. For now, let us proceed to our gathering of suspects. I intend to meet each one anew, record their demeanour, and note the subtle shifts that occur in their eyes when they believe no one watches." We left the music room and proceeded to the grand hall. The morning light revealed cracks in the marble floor, and a slight chill in the air, as though the house itself held its breath. In the adjoining drawing room, a small group had assembled. Lady Delacroix, Cecily, Graves, Mrs. Penrose, Viscount Quilford, and Monsieur Lefavre sat in a semicircle, arranged like pieces on a board. Poirot took his place in the centre, folding his hands behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began in his mellifluous French accent, "I thank you for joining me this morning. Before proceeding with further inquiries, I shall take note of your comportment under fresh circumstance." With that, he closed his eyes for a moment, adopting an almost meditative stance. I watched as Lady Delacroix shifted in her seat, smoothing the folds of her black gown. Her eyes flicked to the harp's miniature replica on the mantel a token. She wore for composure. Cecily's fingers tapped rhythmically on her ivory dress, betraying her youthful impatience. Graves sat rigid, shoulders squared, gaze unwaveringly front. Mrs. Penrose clutched her handkerchief, knuckles whitening. Viscount Quilford leaned back, surveying the room with cool detachment. Lefavre's jaw clenched, his moustache twitching. As he suppressed a frown, Poirot opened his eyes. "Madame Delacroix, permit me to begin with you. Last night You informed us that you left the music room briefly. Where exactly did you go, and what did you see on your return? Lady Delacroix inhaled softly. I fetched new sheets of music from my mother's study. I passed through the gallery where my late father's portrait hangs. I recall his stern gaze upon me. She paused, eyes distant. When I returned, Signora Marini was on the floor, and the glass lay shattered beside her. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you. And did you notice the state of the harp's pedals at that moment? Lady Delacroix frowned. I confess, no. I was too distraught. Her voice quavered. But now that you mention it, I believe one pedal was raised higher than the others. Precisely, Poirot said softly. A minor detail, yet telling. We shall return to that. He then turned to Cecily. Mademoiselle, you mentioned hearing footsteps. This window, did you ever see it open? Cecily swallowed. Yes, monsieur. I thought it a draught at first, so I closed it. She brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. But afterwards, I thought I heard the clicking of a latch. Interesting, Poirot murmured. One never dismisses such sounds. He approached her and lightly touched her shoulder. You are agitated, yet your pulse slows at my touch. You expect me to accuse you. She glanced up, eyes wide. No, monsieur. I wish only to help. He nodded, stepping back. Very good. Now, Monsieur Graves. Last evening you arranged the seating for our suspects. Did you note any unusual requests? Graves' expression remained calm as he replied. Only that Lady Delacroix requested no incense tonight, fearing it might distract. Signora Marini. Everything else proceeded as usual. Poirot stroked his moustache. And the pouch, monsieur, did you retrieve it before the coroner's arrival? Graves hesitated. I placed it with her belongings in the drawing room. I had not inspected its contents. Curious, Poirot said quietly. We shall need to examine that pouch again. He pivoted toward Mrs. Penrose. Madame, your service to this household is exemplary. Did any other staff enter the music room that day? Mrs. Penrose shook her head. Only the footman, who carried in extra candles. He passed through quickly, then turned back to the servants' wing. Yet his footprints appear in the room, Poirot observed, pointing to the floor, and they are lighter than your own. She blinked, as if realizing for the first time. I did not consider it. Poirot smiled gently. Neither did we, until now. Next, Viscount Quilford. You described placing your donation in the offering box. Did you notice whether it was full when you passed by? The Viscount lifted. One gloved hand, fingers splayed. It was empty. Lady Delacroix had informed me that earlier donations had been removed to the study. In the study, Poirot repeated. We shall investigate that locale shortly. He moved to Lefebvre. Maestro, your practice session followed Signora Marinus. Did you hear anything from the music room? Lefebvre's eyes flickered. Only the final chord, then silence. I assumed she had finished playing. He hesitated, then added, but I thought I heard her whisper a name, Madeleine, just before she fell. A hush fell. Lady Delacroix pressed her lips together. Poirot observed her keenly. Did Signora Marini call your name? She drew a trembling breath. No, monsieur. She would not call her patron, at least, not in discord. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactly. Thus, we have a whisper not meant for Lady Delacroix, a whispered clue. He clapped his hands once. Enough for now. We shall retire to the study, examine the offering box and the pouch, and make new deductions. You, Hastings, shall accompany me." He offered an arm to Lady Delacroix, who accepted it gratefully, while the others rose in hesitant compliance. As we filed from the drawing-room, I glanced back. Each suspect wore a mask, some of fear, some of indignation, but none entirely veiled their thoughts. Poirot's entrance had lit a spark in their eyes, and I sensed the investigation's momentum unfolding. With every step, the little grey cells worked unceasingly, drawing threads from this tapestry of deception toward their inevitable NITIL interviews, begin after our brief inspection of the study and the offering box. Poirot deemed it time to commence the formal interviews. He organized the suspects into pairs and assigned us to conduct separate, simultaneous conversations. The aim was to observe reactions unimpeded by their companion's presence. I would interview Mrs. Penrose and Edward Graves in the oak-panelled library, while Poirot would question Lady Delacroix and Cecily in the sunroom. Monsieur Lefebvre and Viscount Quilford were to join later, giving us fresh material for cross-examination. Interview with Mrs. Penrose. The library's heavy drapes were drawn aside to admit a hazy light. Mrs. Penrose sat in a high-backed armchair, clutching her lace-edged handkerchief. I took a seat opposite her, notebook at the ready. "Madame," I began, "thank you for agreeing. I wish to clarify the movements of the staff this afternoon. You mentioned the footman carried candles into the music room. Do you recall his name?" She sniffed gently. "Yes, Thomas Weaver. He brought the extra candles at my request for the evening recital." I nodded. "Did Thomas remain in the vicinity after delivering the candles?" Her brow furrowed. "No, he returned promptly to the servants' wing. I heard his footsteps retreat down the corridor." "Did you see whether he lingered near the music room later, after Signora Marini collapsed?" I asked. Mrs. Penrose's lips pressed into a thin line. "I cannot say. I was supervising the kitchen staff when the commotion began. I rushed here immediately." "Understood." I paused to observe her. Her eyes glistened, but there was a flicker too brief to be mere sorrow. "Madame, did you ever observe Mrs. Mariani in possession of that leather pouch before today?" She glanced down, fumbling the handkerchief. It lay on her dressing table, alongside her costume jewels. "I thought it held hairpins or cosmetics, yet it bore her initials," I said gently. "Did you ever see her remove pills or medication from it?" Her breath caught. "No, never. She was exceptionally health-conscious, never uninterested." In vitality, I made a note. "Thank you, Madame. One more question. Did you ever detect any tension between Signora Marini and any member of the household?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Not with Lady Delacroix or Cecily, but she and Monsieur Lefebvre. There was rivalry, practically acknowledged, though kept polite. I sensed jealousy." I inclined my head. "That is helpful. You may step out now, if you wish." Mrs. Penrose stood, smoothing her apron. "I am grateful, Mr. Hastings. I pray you discover the truth." Interview with Edward Graves. I found Edward Graves at the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds. His posture was impeccable, but his shoulders were unusually tense. "Mr. Graves," I greeted, "if you would, please recount your actions between 2 and 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon." He turned, expression unreadable. "Certainly. I drew Lady Delacroix's bath at 2, then served tea at 1:30. At 3, I replaced the sheet music stand in the music room and fetched fresh water. I did not re-enter the room until alerted by Mrs. Penrose." I leaned forward. "When you replaced the stand, did you handle the leather pouch marked SM? His gaze flickered. I saw it placed on the chaise long by Miss Cecily. I did not move it. Yet when I examined the pouch in the study, it was among Signora Marini's belongings, coins missing. Did you inspect the contents? He hesitated. I moved it only to keep it with her sash and shawl, to prevent it from rolling under the furniture. His voice remained calm. I watched him closely. He avoided direct eye contact, chin tilted downward. Mr. Graves, a witness heard footsteps, not yours. Not Cecily's behind Signora Marini after she struck the final note. Could another member of staff have entered at that moment? He exhaled slowly. Only I held the key to the music room once the lesson began. No other servant entered after I closed the door. I tapped my notebook, and yet the window was found unlatched. Could the footman, Thomas, have used that route? Graves's fine features tightened imperceptibly. Impossible. Thomas is unaccustomed to that side of the manor. Moreover, the servants' wing is out of his path. I rose. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Your candour is appreciated. Poirot's interview with Lady Delacroix across the hall in the sunroom. Poirot sat beside Lady Delacroix on a settee of pale silk. She grasped a small fan, her knuckles white. Poirot's manner was gentle, his tone inviting confidence. My lady, he began, you have shown admirable composure under distress. I wish to delve deeper into your observations. When you returned to the music room, did you notice any change in Signora Marini's expression? Lady Delacroix inhaled. She looked startled, eyes wide as she clutched at her chest. Then she staggered backward and collapsed. Poirot inclined his head, and did her hands tremble? She closed her eyes. Yes, I assumed it was shock. He produced a small magnifying glass and examined her hand lightly. Might I? She extended it. Poirot observed the palm and fingers. No tremor, no graceful steadiness. But at that moment, you say, she showed fear. Lady Delacroix nodded. An intensity of fear I had never seen in her. Poirot studied her. Do you truly believe the harp itself was responsible, or did you suspect another's intervention? She paused, glancing toward the window. At first, I thought the harp malfunctioned until I noticed the pedal, but then I saw the strands of silk on the bushes outside. Poirot's eyes brightened. The lavender scarf fibers. He placed the glass in his waistcoat pocket. You did not mention those before. I did not wish to prejudice your investigation, she confessed. Honesty is the greatest gift, Madame Poirot said kindly. He rose. Thank you. Your recollections will guide us. Poirot's interview with Cecily Delacroix. Cecily sat at a small writing desk, hands folded in her lap. Poirot approached, adopting his persona of warm confidence. Mademoiselle, he said, you aided Signora Marini so often turning pages, offering support. Tell me, did she ever express fear of someone in the household? Cecily hesitated. She was uneasy about Monsieur Lefebvre's competitiveness, but she never spoke of fear. Her eyes brimmed with tears. And last night, Poirot pressed, when you heard footsteps, did you recognize their pace or rhythm? She closed her eyes, slow, deliberate and hurried. Poirot nodded. And when you closed the window, did you notice the latch was stiff? She nodded. Yes, I thought it odd, but did not think further. He tapped his chin. Mademoiselle, you saw the glove on the piano. Did you place it there? Cecily's breath caught. No. That glove is mine. I must have dropped it when I returned. I did not think to retrieve it. Her voice quavered. "I swear I meant no deception." Poirot patted her hand. "Very good. One never lies unless one fears the truth." He rose and offered her a reassuring smile. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As I rejoined Poirot in the corridor, he closed his small notebook and exhaled softly. "Mon ami, the interviews begin to reveal threads of jealousy, discretion, and restraint. Each suspect guards their secret like a precious note." He paused, eyes distant. "But we are yet at the overture. The true symphony of motive remains unheard." I nodded, aware that the net was tightening. With each testimony, Poirot's little grey cells sifted fact from feint. The initial interviews had begun, and with them, the quiet unravelling of the mystery deepened, promising the next movement in this deadly concerto. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews begin there. Morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Delacour's manor as Poirot declared the moment ripe for private questioning. He divided the household into discrete pairs. Mrs. Penrose and Edward Graves would speak with Hastings in the Oak Penalt library, while Poirot himself would interview Lady Delacour and Cecily in the adjoining sunroom. The remaining two gentlemen, Viscount Quilford and Monsieur Lefebvre, would follow in turn, ensuring each suspect faced the little grey cells alone. In the library, I found Mrs. Penrose seated stiffly in a high-backed armchair, her lace-edged handkerchief fluttered in her grasp. I began by asking her to recount the movements of the staff the previous afternoon. She spoke of summoning Thomas Weaver, the footman, to supply extra candles, and of supervising kitchen duties when the fatal note rang out. Though her voice trembled with genuine sorrow, a subtle dart of unease betrayed her. When questioned about the leather pouch marked Essom, she admitted it had rested on Signora Marini's dressing table, but insisted it contained only cosmetic items. Yet her pause at the mention of pills suggested a hidden concern. Finally, when asked if there had been friction between Signora Marini and any member of the household, her downcast eyes and sigh hinted at the rivalry she had perceived between the harpist and the pianist. Monsieur Lefebvre. I then turned to Edward Graves, the butler, standing rigid beside a broad window that framed the dew-dappled gardens. He meticulously detailed his tasks, drawing Lady Delacour's bath at 2 o'clock, serving tea at past, replacing the music stand at 3, and returning only when summoned after the collapse. When I inquired whether he had handled the leather pouch, his calm denial and slight wavering of gaze suggested he believed the pouch was Miss Cecily's by virtue of her initials, yet the mystery of the missing coins gnawed at him. He maintained that no other servant entered the room once he secured it, and that Thomas Weaver would never venture to that wing of the manor. Though his composure was exemplary, the tightness around his jaw hinted at knowledge he chose not yet to reveal. Meanwhile, in the sunroom, Poirot welcomed Lady Delacour with sympathetic courtesy. He asked her to recall Signora Marini's final expression. The lady described terror so vivid it had frozen her composure, yet admitted she had not noticed the harp's pedals until later reflection. Poirot gently pressed for every nuance: the slight tremor of the harpist's hands, the stifled gasp before collapse, the boulevard of emotions passing through her eyes. When Lady Delacour confessed she had not mentioned the lavender silk fibres tangled in the rosebush beyond the window, Poirot's eyes sparkled. This admission opened a new avenue of inquiry. Someone had entered through that opening, perhaps gloved to avoid fingerprints, and left a telltale fragment of a scarf. Cecily sat at a delicate writing desk, her youthful features suffused with concern, Poirot prompted her to describe the footsteps she had heard. She distilled her memory to a single, deliberate pace, neither hurried nor hesitant. When probed about the stiff latch she had forced closed on the window, Cecily confessed. She had dismissed it as a draught, unaware it signified an intruder's path. Poirot then inquired about the single glove placed on the piano bench. Cecily blushed, claiming it must have slipped from her reticule, yet her explanation did little to assuage suspicion, for the glove bore no dust and had been placed with almost ritual care. Each time she rejoined her mother after leaving the music room, her pulse must have thrummed like the harp's strings. But she swore her intentions were innocent. As Hastings and Poirot reconvened, they exchanged notes on trembling hands, stifled glances, and selective recollections. Poirot closed his notebook with a quiet snap and observed, "The chorus of testimonies reveals subtle dissonances. Mrs. Penrose's flicker at the mention of pills, Graves's deflection regarding the pouch, Lady Delacroix's omission of the lavender threads, Cecily's unintentional misplacement of her glove. Each is but a single note, yet together they form a motif of concealment." We then prepared to question Viscount Quilford and Monsieur Lefavre. The Viscount, when approached, confirmed his patronage of Lady Delacroix's scholarship and described placing a coin in the silver offering box before retreating for refreshments. He insisted the box was empty at the time, asserting earlier donations had been removed to the study. Poirot noted his gloved fingers tapping a restless rhythm and mentioned the offering boxes. Inexplicable vacancy during the harpist's collapse. Quilford's cool detachment flickered momentarily, as if he regretted leaving the coin elsewhere. Finally, Poirot turned to Monsieur Lefavre. The pianist's refined moustache quivered when asked if he had detected fear in Signora Marina's eyes. He admitted she had glanced toward the open window before playing the final chord, whispering Madeline in a voice too low for others to catch. This revelation stunned Lady Delacroix, whose name the victim would never invoke in a plea. Lefavre's confession suggested both intimacy and resentment an artist scorned by his rival's rising fame. Poirot's note-taking was almost imperceptible, as he absorbed the implication. At the conclusion of these private interviews, Poirot surveyed the assembled suspects with measured restraint. "Madame et messieurs," he announced, "you have kindly shared your recollections. We shall now deliberate upon these confessions and contradictions. I trust that, in due course, each of you will find comfort in truth." As the guests dispersed, I caught Poirot's reflective gaze upon the ornate harp replica perched on a side table. His little grey cells were already orchestrating the next movement of this deadly concerto. Thus concluded the initial interviews a symphony of half-truths and omissions. With every testimony, the web of suspicion drew tighter, promising that, when Poirot's mind struck the true note of motive, the culprit would have nowhere left to hide. Chapter 6. First false lead that evening. The household gathered once more in Delacroix Manor's drawing-room, the lamps casting long shadows that trembled against the damask walls. A palpable tension had settled over the estate, as though the very bricks awaited revelation. Inspector Leclerc, summoned by Poirot, had called for a preliminary announcement, an announcement that, too many ears, signalled an initial resolution. Poirot took centre stage by the fireplace, his posture regal and composed. He addressed the assembled suspects in measured tones. "Madame et messieurs, the evidence thus far has been most illuminating. Yet one early inconsistency demands our immediate attention. It concerns the half-empty glass of Chateau Renaud, and the contents of the leather pouch bearing Signora Marini's initials. Inspector Leclerc stepped forward with a silver goblet in hand. Upon forensic examination, he declared, traces of a rare toxin were discovered in the remnants of wine you find here. A swift-acting substance, odorless and tasteless, often administered in minute doses. He cast a pointed glance at Mrs. Penrose and Edward Graves. The bottle was handled by both of you. Gasps rippled through the room. Lady Delacroix pressed a hand to her throat. Cecily's eyes filled. Mrs. Penrose paled, her lace-edged handkerchief fluttering against her knuckles. Graves's composure seemed to falter as his polished shoes scraped against the parquet. Leclerc continued. Further, the pouch once contained a small pill vial, now missing. That vial held antidotal serum, identifiable by its unique glass stopper. Its absence suggests an attempt to mask the presence of poison, yet the poison persisted in the wine. Poirot raised a slender finger. Indeed, when I observed the pouch in the study, the lining bore faint traces of powdered residue. Only someone intimately acquainted with Signora Marini's routine could locate and remove the serum so deftly. He allowed his gaze to rest on Mrs. Penrose. Madame, you admitted you saw the pouch on the dressing table this afternoon. Her voice trembled. Yes, monsieur, but I touched nothing, only moved it to prevent it from falling behind the chaise longue. Cecily stepped forward, voice shaking. Mother, you served the wine. How could you? Lady Delacroix interceded. Cecily, silence. She turned to Poirot. Monsieur, I assure you, I would never harm Signora Marini. The wine was meant to soothe her nerves. Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. He then addressed Graves. Monsieur Graves, you claimed you had no reason to examine the pouches. Contents, yet your rounds took you back to the music room after I left yesterday. Graves exhaled. I returned only to retrieve Signora Marini's shawl after she fell. The pouch was among her belongings. I carried it to the drawing-room and once Leclerc seized upon this, and yet the serum vial vanished between your handling and our discovery. He stepped toward Graves, voice hardening. Where did you place the vial? Graves's shoulders slumped. I placed the pouch on the sideboard in the study. I did not notice the vial's absence until after you questioned me. His voice wavered. I thought only of consoling Lady Delacroix. Leclerc's lips curled, a convenient lapse. He turned to the assembled party. Ladies and gentlemen, the initial evidence implicates Mr. Graves in administering poison to Signora Marini's wine. We shall detain him until further inquiry. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Mrs. Penrose dabbed at her eyes, as if relieved at the blame shifted elsewhere. Viscount Quilford nodded gravely. Monsieur Lefebvre's brows knitted in sudden triumph. Cecily clung to her mother's arm, her youthful face streaked with tears. Leclerc placed Graves under informal guard, instructing 2 constables to stand watch. The butler's fine features, once composed, now betrayed a flash of despair. He cast a pleading look at Lady Delacroix, who offered only a sorrowful nod. As the constables led Graves away, Poirot's dark eyes followed them. Once the door had closed, he turned to the remaining guests. Madame et Messieurs, while this evidence appears compelling, I urge patience before celebrating resolution. Let us remember that the little grey cells demand thorough examination of every strand. He gestured toward the poker on the hearth. For example, consider the soot smudge on the marble hearthstone, a detail that does not align with mere poison. Inspector Leclerc frowned. Monsieur Poirot, we have clear toxicological proof. Why question this lead? Poirot inclined his head with gentle courtesy, because, mon ami, the true murderer rarely relies on a single method. We must ensure the poison was indeed delivered through the wine, and not by other means entirely. I suspect that the toxin may have been administered through the instrument itself, perhaps via the very string Signora Marini struck. I caught Lady Delacour's startled gaze, and Cecily's pale face reflected dawning doubt. Mrs. Penrose's hand trembled as she folded her handkerchief. Viscount Quilford and Monsieur Lefavre exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot continued. The rigid harp, pedal, and the freshly replaced A-flat string, these remain unexplained by the poison theory. Furthermore, the glove upon the piano bench, unsoiled yet deliberately placed, speaks of a staged scene. He drew a breath. We must not be beguiled by a single note to ignore the rest of the composition. Leclerc muttered under his breath, but acquiesced to Poirot's insistence. Very well, you have my leave to pursue these strings of evidence. As the inspector withdrew, Poirot turned to me, his manner returning to its customary warmth. Hastings, see that Mrs. Penrose and Cecily remain available. I wish to revisit their earlier testimonies in light of this new complication. He paused, eyes narrowing with purpose. We have a first false lead, mon ami. A suspect conveniently ensnared by circumstantial proof. Yet I sense deeper motives woven into this concerto of deceit. I nodded, aware that the evening had taken a dramatic turn. As the guests dispersed, some relieved, some uneasy, the manor's corridors echoed, with footsteps heavy with doubt. The first false lead had drawn a convenient conclusion, but Poirot's little grey cells would not rest until every note of the mystery had been played and the true culprit unmasked. Chapter 7. The psychological game. Late into the night, Delacroix Manor's drawing room glowed with the soft light of shaded lamps. A hush prevailed, broken only by the crackle of logs in the fireplace. Poirot had summoned the remaining household, Lady Delacroix, Cecily, Mrs. Penrose, Viscount Quilford, and Monsieur Lefavre to the scene of the initial gathering. The arrest of Graves weighed on the air like a storm cloud, but Poirot would not permit complacency. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, settling into his armchair with deliberate grace. We have witnessed the arrest of our butler on circumstantial evidence, yet I suspect the true culprit remains among us. He allowed his tone to drop, drawing each face into fearful attention. Tonight, we engage in a psychological game, one of observation, subtle provocation, and the testing of reactions. I took my seat beside him, heart quickened. Poirot continued, we shall proceed in rounds. I shall speak to each of you individually, offering a carefully crafted remark to gauge your response. Miss Delacroix, you will commence. Cecily's eyes widened. She rose and moved to stand by the hearth. Poirot addressed her in his gentlest voice. Mademoiselle, you have been most attentive to Signora Marini. You loved her music. Yet tell me, if you had known that final chord might cost her life, would you have closed the window so hastily? Her throat bobbed. She pressed her hands together behind her back. Monsieur, I merely wished to keep out a draught. I never imagined someone would enter through that pane. She swallowed. If I had known, I would have left it ajar to let help arrive sooner. Poirot's lips curved faintly. A thoughtful answer, mademoiselle. Yet I note your voice trembles on that last phrase. Is it shame you feel, or fear? Cecily's cheeks burned. She stammered, Fear, monsieur. Fear that I overlooked something important. Poirot's gaze lingered a moment, then he nodded. Very well. He turned to Mrs. Penrose, who sat stiffly on the sofa. Madame, you served the wine that evening. You spoke of obedience to Lady Delacour, but consider this. If the pouch had contained cosmetics or pills, would you not have safeguarded it more carefully? Her eyes flickered. She brushed at her sleeve with trembling fingers. I trusted it to the butler, monsieur. Poirot raised an eyebrow, and yet the vial vanished under his watch. Do you believe his innocence more steadfast than your own, or is trust a convenience we use to shield our suspicion? Tears glinted in her eyes, but she did not answer. Viscount Quilford leaned forward, arms crossed. Poirot addressed him next. Your lordship, you claimed to place your donation in the silver box, yet the offering box lay empty when Signora Marini fell. You insisted earlier endowments had been removed. Pray, what becomes of truth when all records are gone? Quilford's composure cracked. His gloved fingers flexed, producing a faint crack. My family's records lie in London, monsieur. The silver box is but a temporary repository. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Temporary, yes, but for how long? Does the donor's name bear greater weight than the accident for which that box was prepared? The Viscount's jaw clenched. Monsieur Lefebvre reclined near the piano, fingers drumming its ivory keys. Poirot's voice softened. Maestro, you and Signora Marini shared the stage. You witnessed her brilliance. Sand perhaps felt its eclipse. Upon your own, when she struck that final note, did envy whisper in your ear? Lefebvre's gaze snapped to Poirot. His moustache trembled as he spoke. Envy is the accompaniment of admiration, monsieur. Without it, one feels no passion. Poirot's lips quirked in satisfaction. Indeed, but tell me, how does genuine passion differ from a lethal obsession? Lefebvre's pallor deepened, and he pushed from the piano as though to strike a chord that would not sound. Finally, Poirot turned to Lady Delacour, whose black silk dress shimmered in the lamplight. She stood by a window, gaze distant. Poirot approached her calmly. Madame, you are protector of this household. You summoned each person here, yet spoke of tragedy as though from afar. If you suspected harm, would you not have barred the doors, locked the windows, and kept Signora Marini under watch? Lady Delacour's voice was low but steady. I trusted the harmony of my home, monsieur. I believed no ill would enter mother's faith. Poirot's eyes softened. Faith, yes, but what of foresight? The scarlet blot on the music sheets, the hidden tension beneath polite applause, did you not sense them before her collapse? She closed her eyes, breaths shallow. My senses failed me. With each remark, Poirot watched intently as tiny fissures appeared in the suspect's facades. Cecily's hands shook as she sank onto the sofa. Mrs. Penrose wiped her tears with trembling lace. The Viscount glowered, his composure slipping. Lefebvre clenched his fists and gnashed his teeth. Lady Delacour's knees weakened before her daughter caught her arm. Poirot sat again, closing his eyes briefly as though savouring a fine wine. Then he spoke softly. Mon ami Hastings, do you see how each soul reveals a hidden note when provoked? We have played a psychological game, but we must now listen to the unspoken responses. He opened his notebook and jotted a few lines. Tomorrow we shall analyze these reactions against the evidence. Tonight, rest your mind, for the little grey cells shall not slumber. As the group dispersed, a palpable unease settled over the drawing room. Even the fireplace's flames seemed subdued, as though wary of drawing attention. I lingered to help Cecily steady her trembling frame, and saw in her eyes the pain of innocence questioned. Above us, the grand portrait of Lady Delacroix. Father brooded in silence. By the time I rejoined Poirot in his sitting room, he was seated at his writing table, pen in hand. He glanced up, eyes bright with purpose. "Hastings, the psychological game has begun. We now possess a symphony of reactions, clues woven into fear, guilt, and hesitation. Rest now, mon ami. Tomorrow we press forward into the next movement. A secondary crisis to further entangle the threads." He tapped his pen decisively, and so the tension rises. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The morning air at Delacroix Manor carried a brittle chill, as though the house itself shivered beneath the weight of the previous night's revelations. Though the drawing-room had fallen silent after psychological provocations, the household stirred with uneasy purpose. I found the inspector in the library, peering over his spectacles at the toxicology report once more. "Monsieur Hastings," the clerk greeted, voice low. "A curious development. Lady Delacroix's will is missing." I blinked. "Her will?" "Sir," he nodded gravely. "It was stored in her personal desk in the study. When I sought it for probate preparations, troubled by the possibility of Signora Marini's demise-altering inheritance, I discovered the drawer empty. As we crossed the gallery, portraits of stern ancestors seemed to watch us. At the study door, Poirot awaited, hands folded. He inclined his head. "Ah, Leclerc, another strand unswools. The missing will suggests yet a second culprit, one with motive not rooted in poison or music." Lady Delacroix appeared at the threshold, pale but resolute. This is impossible. I reviewed that will yesterday afternoon. It bequeaths the estate to Cecily and a modest legacy to each member of the staff." Her voice faltered. "I left it here, beneath my grandmother's photograph." Poirot stepped aside, permitting us entry. The study was in disarray. Papers strewn across the Turkish rug, the mahogany desk drawers sprung open. The silver offering box from the music room sat on the desk's polished surface, its lid ajar, empty once more. A single sheet of paper lay crumpled in the wastebasket. "I retrieved that box last night." Graves's voice came from behind us. The butler released on recognizance stood somberly. "I returned it to the study at Lady Delacroix's request, and left it here when I departed." Poirot's gaze travelled to the crumpled paper. He retrieved it with gloved fingers and smoothed it flat. "An unsigned draft," he murmured, "of a will revision." He read silently, then looked up. "It names Monsieur Lefebvre, sole beneficiary of Lady Delacroix's music collection, and grants him the manor at his discretion." He held the draft so all could see. "This was never signed, but it reveals intent." Cecily gasped and covered her mouth. Mrs. Penrose stepped forward, lips pressed tight. Viscount Quilford scowled. Lefebvre himself paled, blinking as though caught in shame. Lady Delacroix drew a shuddering breath. "I would never have agreed to such terms. That draft is a forgery." She looked at Lefebvre. "Did you compose this?" He stammered, voice low. I found it in your study while searching for the recital program." "I meant only to read." Poirot raised a finger. "Madame, who else had keys to your study?" She hesitated. "My husband's solicitor. He visited weekly, but he left at noon. No one else holds these keys." Leclerc frowned. "We shall summon the solicitor immediately." He turned, but Poirot placed a hand on his arm. "Patience, Inspector Poirot," advised. We must consider that the will's disappearance and this draft occurred after the poison lead. The murderer may have diversified criminal tactics, first to silence Signora Marini, then to secure the estate. He eyed the empty offering box. Observe how the box, emptied of donations, mirrors the empty will drawer. Both suggest removal by the same hand. Graves cleared his throat. Inspector, I saw Viscount Quilford near this desk late last night, just after Madame Delacroix retired. He lingered by the desk lamp, rifling through papers. Quilford's eyes narrowed. I came to retrieve Lady Delacroix's handwritten dedication for my donation plaque. I did not touch her personal documents. Poirot stroked his moustache. Yet the dedication lies in the drawing room alongside the plaque sketch. It was moved. Cecily stepped forward, voice steady despite tears. Mother, when I re-entered this room to fetch my gloves, I noted the wastebasket was empty. Only this discarded draft remained. I thought it odd, and so retrieved it. She offered Poirot the paper. He accepted it thoughtfully. Another service, well done, mademoiselle. He turned to Lady Delacroix. Madame, let us consider who benefits most from your absence. Lefebvre gains your music collection, and the Manor Quilford secures no family endowment here. Mrs. Penrose and Graves receive but modest sums. The greatest beneficiary is the pianist. He held Lefebvre's gaze. Yet we must not leap to accusation without verifying the draft's authenticity. Pulling from his waistcoat, Poirot produced a small magnifying lens. He examined the paper's watermark and ink. This parchment is of fine Italian stock, not found in England. The signature line is clean, as though written in haste. The ink, however, matches the copyist's supply located in the librarian's desk drawer behind the portrait of Lord Delacroix. I recalled the librarian's desk near the entrance. Monsieur, did you find any writing implements missing? Poirot nodded. A quill and a vial of sepia ink are absent. The perpetrator required materials. He pointed at Lefebvre. Will you kindly explain why you entered the study armed with those tools? Lefebvre swallowed, voice trembling. I know explanation rings true, monsieur. I can only say I did not intend to alter your mother's will. I thought only to glance at her notes on the recital program. He looked down, shame evident. Poirot turned to Viscount Quilford. Your lordship, Graves's testimony places you here last evening, near the desk. Quilford straightened. He likely misread my silhouette by lamplight. I assure you, I handled nothing beyond the program dedication. Poirot's gaze softened. Such errors of perception occur when one seeks innocence in oneself rather than evidence. He looked to Mrs. Penrose. And you, madame, did you enter here after serving evening tea? She shook her head. I remained in the servants' wing until I heard raised voices. I then came to assist. Her glance at Cecily was fleeting, as though hiding guilt. Lady Delacroix's eyes narrowed on Mrs. Penrose. Is that true? She spoke with maternal firmness. Did you enter my study to retrieve anything? Mrs. Penrose's lips trembled. I thought I saw my knitting basket here after I fetched my shawl. But I found only papers. Her voice broke. I left at once. Poirot folded the draft and replaced it in the wastebasket. We now have two crimes intertwined, the poisoning of Signora Marini and the disappearance of the will. One aims to end a life, the other to redirect an inheritance. He looked at Lady Delacroix. Madame, I advise you to secure your papers forthwith. Le clerc moved to lock the desk. Poirot placed a calming hand on Lady Delacroix's arm. Fear not, madame. we shall unweave this tapestry of duplicity. As we filed from the study, each suspect's countenance a study in guilt, shame, or indignation, Poirot whispered to me. The secondary mystery deepens our investigation. Now we observe not only what was taken, but why. Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall probe hidden connections that bind our suspects to these deceptions. Outside, the dawn light shimmered on the manor's wet stones. Within, the echoes of a missing will and a forged draft promised that Delacroix' manor's secrets were far from exhausted. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The morning following the discovery of Lady Delacroix's missing will, a nervous hush settled over the manor. Curtains were drawn more tightly, and the hush of servants' footsteps seemed fraught with secrecy. Poirot summoned us all to the oak-panelled library, every suspect, along with Inspector Leclerc and myself. The fire crackled softly, as though urging confession, but none dared speak until Poirot raised his hand. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, eyes alight. We have examined evidence of two crimes, the death of Signora Marini and the disappearance of Lady Delacroix's will. Yet these acts do not stand alone. They are entwined by hidden connections, relationships, and grudges that link one suspect to another in ways at first unseen. He paused, letting the meaning sink in. I observed our circle. Lady Delacroix poised, though pallid, Cecily, clutching the hem of her ivory dress. Mrs. Penrose's fingers twisting her handkerchief. Viscount Quilford, expression guarded. Monsieur Lefebvre, jaw clenched. And Edward Graves, eyes downcast by the fireplace. Poirot continued, First, let us consider the matter of financial entanglements. Viscount Quilford's endowment to Lady Delacroix's music scholarship is well known, yet this year's donation was increased, threefolder, generosity unusual even for him. He fixed Quilford with a steady gaze. My research indicates that your family's coal interests have recently suffered a strike, reducing profits by 20%. Your gift may well have been intended to shore up Lady Delacroix's goodwill, perhaps in hopes of securing a favourable mention in the London Gazette. Quilford's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot turned to Lefebvre. Maestro, you and Signora Marini shared stages and applause, but also critics. I discovered a series of anonymous letters sent to the Music Critics Society, hinting at improprieties in your performances. The writer's style matches your own handwriting, albeit disguised. Lefebvre's eyes flashed. I was jealous of her fame, he admitted in a low voice, but I never slandered her. He looked at Lady Delacroix. Your generosity to her career eclipsed my own hopes. Lady Delacroix inclined her head. Monsieur Lefebvre, I recommended Signora Marini for every gala this season. You know this is true. Her tone was reproachful but sorrowful. Poirot then addressed Mrs. Penrose. You have served this household for decades. Yet recently I found a ledger hidden beneath your ironing board accounts of private payments made by yourself to Signora Marini. Entries show sums labelled discretion fee. Pray, explain. Mrs. Penrose's face drained of colour. She rose, voice quavering. I feared Signora Marini would speak of personal matters. She discovered my nephew in debt to unsavoury men. I paid her to keep silent for her safety and mine. She looked beseechingly at Cecily. She was trying to protect you. Cecily's brow furrowed. You paid her. What secret did she hide? Mrs. Penrose hesitated, then whispered, a letter from a gentleman abroad in acknowledgement of their relationship. She faltered. I begged her not to reveal it. She agreed, but I still feared scandal. A murmur arose. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oso Signora Marini carried not only a harpist's grace, but also a private romance. He turned to Cecily. Mademoiselle, you said you never suspected such an affair, yet you aided her closely each day. Cecily's hand flew to her throat. I knew nothing of it. Poirot moved to Graves. And you, monsieur, did you ever see this gentleman's letters? Graves glanced at the hearth. I delivered Lady Delacroix's mail each morning. I saw some letters from Italy marked confidential. I assumed they were estate business. His voice was steady, but eyes troubled. Poirot nodded. Indeed, these are the very letters Mrs. Penrose mentioned. They concerned a Signor Bellini, a wealthy patron of the arts in Venice. He promised Signora Marini a yearly stipend. He locked eyes with Lefebvre. Does this explain your rivalry? That the harpist received foreign patronage you desired? Lefebvre bowed his head. It stung, yes. Poirot allowed a moment's silence before revealing his next connection. Finally, consider the relationship between Lady Delacroix and Viscount Quilford. Though your scholarship funding is generous, the Valcourt estate sale adjacent to these grounds goes to auction next month. Lady Delacroix, as primary bidder, would secure more land, extending her gardens. Your own family's holdings lie just beyond. Expansion by her hand threatens your dominion, does it not? Quilford's composure shattered. He rose abruptly. She will not expand. Her finances are too precarious after this scandal. He pointed at Lady Delacroix in accusation. She cannot afford new land. She seeks to recoup losses from this. Will she lost? Lady Delacroix drew herself up. You betray the very trust that made me consider your family's friendship. Leclerc stepped forward, his jaw set. This is the web you have woven: jealousy, fear of scandal, ambition. But which thread leads to murder? Poirot's gaze swept the group. These hidden connections, financial desperation, artistic envy, illicit romance, form the undercurrent of motive. Yet the crime of poison required opportunity and technical knowledge. The poisoning alone implicates Mrs. Penrose's familiarity with Signora Marini's routines and Monsieur Lefebvre's access to her instruments. The missing will implicates Lefebvre most heavily, but the romance and land deals bind Mrs. Penrose and Viscount Quilford in secrecy. He paused, voice softening. We see alliances and enmities weaves together. The truth, however, lies in how one suspect harnessed these connections to commit both crimes. He tapped his finger on the table. Tomorrow we shall test these alliances with direct confrontation and observe who falters under the weight of their own lies. He closed his notebook decisively. For now, Mies Amos, reflect on the ties that bind you. The next step will reveal whether strength lies in unity or treachery. As the assembly dispersed, each person seemed lost in thoughts, some glancing in wary suspicion, others pressing hands to troubled brows. In the hush that followed, I felt the strands Poirot had revealed begin to tug at each suspect's conscience. The hidden connections had been laid bare, yet the final knot remained to be untied. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. For the household stirred for breakfast. Poirot rapped sharply upon my door. Hastings, the time has come for the little grey cells to dine on fresh evidence. Dress yourself and meet me in the music room. His tone brooked no delay. I found him already there, kneeling beside the harp with his magnifying glass in hand, eyes bright with discovery. The room was hushed, the first pale light of dawn slipping through the burgundy drapes. Signora Marini's harp stood solemn and silent, as if anticipating its next performance. Poirot straightened, beckoning me closer. "Observe, Hastings, the flat string." He pointed to the single, freshly replaced wire, its silvery sheen, incongruous among the others. Yesterday we noted its brightness. Today we see the reason. He held up the magnifying glass. "Look here." Under the lens, the string's winding revealed a cluster of minute particles, no larger than pinheads, clinging between the coils. I peered at the glinting fragments. Glass shards, exactament. Poirot inclined his head. Someone concealed a tiny glass ampule within the string's winding. Upon the final chord, the rapid vibration shattered the vial, releasing a fine aerosol of poison into the air. He tapped his forehead. A masterpiece of misdirection. No wound, no taste, no smell, yet a fatal inhalation. I crouched beside him, heart pounding. "But how did you deduce this?" Poirot's mustache twitched in satisfaction. The smudge on the marble hearthstone, too dark for soot alone, was not merely a dropped blot of residue, but a smear of glass powder, fallen from the ampule's fragments. He rose and retrieved a small wooden box from the piano bench. Opening it, he revealed the older flat string, coiled neatly. I requested this replacement from Edward Graves under false pretext. He held the discarded string aloft. Note: the nearly invisible spiral of lavender thread tied at its end. The same color as the scarf fibers found tangled in the rosebush beyond the window. I ran my finger along the thread. The killer wrapped the vial in thread to hide it, then tossed the old string aside. Precisely, Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But there is more. Look at the spot on the string's winding." He lifted a fragment of the old wire into view. A faint yellow stain gleamed in the morning light. An oily residue, one not native to harp maintenance. I tested it against samples from this room. He moved to the mahogany side table, where he had placed small vials. "This oil is a compound used in piano key lubrication, insoluble in water but easily transferred to metal. Only Monsieur Lefebvre's piano bench bore that oil." He pressed his gloved fingertip to the stain and brought it to his nostrils, sniffing delicately. And I detected the faint aroma of cognacan, ingredient of the varnish he uses on his instrument. The fingerprint of the artist, mon ami. I exhaled, astonished. "So, the murderer is the pianist." Poirot shook his head gently. "Patience. While the evidence points to someone intimately familiar with both string maintenance and piano mechanics, we must confirm opportunity. But this, Hastings, is the core of our design. A concealed ampule hidden within the harp itself." He swept the other strings with a light touch, as though mourning the innocent chords they would no longer produce. No poison was needed in the wine. That was a diversion of false lead orchestrated to implicate the butler and the housekeeper. The real killing instrument was the harp. I paced the room, mind racing. And the glass fragments, could they not have been planted? "Possible, but unlikely," Poirot replied. "The small particles match fragments found in the wastebasket draft of the forged will. How, I wondered, could the same glass shards appear in both locations? Then I recalled the wastebasket paper was used to wrap the broken ampule after the rehearsal, before disposal. He tapped his chin. The forger prepared his will draft in haste immediately after shattering the vial during practice. The fragments from the draft and the harp are identical in composition and texture. I sank into a chair, absorbing the revelation. And the lavender thread, that too was a ruse. Poirot pointed to the drape's tassel cord on the window. That thread was cut from Lady Delacroix's own scarf, left at the window too. Suggest an intruder entry. but the loop left at the drape was identical. The killer desired us to believe entry came through the garden, while in fact the replacement of the string occurred in the music room under pretense of tuning. I stood abruptly. Only the pianist would have both access and skill to replace. A harp string without notice. Poirot smiled faintly, and only someone who feared exposure of both a secret romance and a desperate act of forgery. The same person who sought to rewrite Lady Delacroix's will. He paused, letting the thought settle. We have isolated the method, but the motive and confession must still be drawn out. He folded his hands behind his back and surveyed. The harp. This clue is our lodestar, Hastings. It reveals the instrument of death and exposes the cunning of its wielder. Tomorrow we confront Monsieur Lefebvre with these findings and observe whether his composure cracks under the weight of undeniable truth. I nodded, anticipation and relief mingling within me. I shall prepare the evidence, Poirot, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Yes, but remember, the greatest trick of the mind is to accept visible proof while ignoring the subtler movements of the heart. We will need both to ensnare the culprit. As the dawn light strengthened, we left the music room together, Poirot carrying the old string in its wooden box, and I bearing the magnifying glass and vials. Each knew that the secret clue had transformed the investigation. The harp was no mere witness, but the weapon itself, and the little grey cells now had the means to strike at the murderer's hidden soul. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The midday light streamed through the tall windows of the drawing-room, illuminating the anxious faces assembled once more. Word of Poirot's discovery, the hidden ampule, the broken string. The lavender thread had spread among the household like wildfire, and each suspect now bore the weight of potential exposure. The room thrummed with quiet unease. Cecily Delacroix sat rigidly beside her mother. Mrs. Penrose clutched her handkerchief. Viscount Quilford hovered near the mantel. Edward Graves paced by the window, and Monsieur Lefebvre stood alone by the piano, fingers brushing its keys as if seeking solace. Poirot stood at the head of the room, the wooden box containing the old string upon a side table. His gaze swept the group with deliberate calm. Madame et Messieurs, you have heard that the true instrument of Signora Marini's demise was the harp itself. The Mathada concealed glass ampule within the string was exquisite in its cruelty, yet the hour has come for us to observe how each of you responds under this knowledge. He folded his arms behind his back. Tensions rise when guilt presses upon the soul like a tightening vice. Let us see who falters first. Lady Delacroix rose unsteadily to her feet. Monsieur Poirot, if the method implicates only one person, why collect us all here? Her voice quivered, betraying both fear and indignation. Poirot inclined his head. Because the orchestration of this crime required collusion or, at least, silent acquiescence. The murderer needed access to the harp, knowledge of string replacement, familiarity with poison, and an understanding of the household schedule. This suggests one primary architect and possibly an assistant who allowed the opportunity. He paused, eyes narrowing. I shall ask each of you, in turn, to speak candidly. What explanation can you offer for your connection to the harp and to Signora Marini's routines? He motioned to Cecily first. Her breath came quickly as she stood. I aided Signora Marini by turning pages and adjusting her music stand. I observed her practice daily and knew which strings were old and which new. But I would never harm her. She was like a second mother to me. Her voice cracked. I loved her. Poirot observed her closely. A loving pupil, yet you knew her habits better than most. You closed the window in haste. You placed your glove upon the piano bench to distract us earlier, and you wore the lavender thread on your scarf. His tone remained gentle. How do you account for these connections? Tears shone in Cecily's eyes. I did not plant the thread, I swear it. The glove fell from my lap when I knelt over Signora Marini's body. The scarf, I wore it yesterday for warmth. When I returned to the music room, the tassel snagged on the window latch. That is all. Her mother stepped forward, voice firm. Cecily is truthful. I saw no intent in her movements. Poirot nodded slowly, then addressed Mrs. Penrose. Madame, your intimate knowledge of the household extends to Signora Marini's personal quarters. Yet when I examined your ledger of discretion fees, I noted entries matching the cost of glass ampoules purchased by a local apothecary. Mrs. Penrose's brow furrowed as she clutched her handkerchief tighter. I feared scandal more. Then cry my payments were to silence gossip, not to facilitate murder. I had no reason to handle strings or poison her. He let her words hang before turning to Edward Graves. Monsieur, as the butler, you ordered the replacement of flat string from the harp technician. You also arranged the schedule for Signora Marini's tuning. I ask you to procure the spare string under the guise of maintenance. You complied without question. Graves's posture stiffened. True. Graves's voice trembled slightly. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, I ordered the new string when Signora complained of uneven tension. I delivered it personally, but I had no knowledge of any ampulle. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet you handled the very string containing the vial. You bore it to the music room at twilight, unbeknownst to others. How do you explain your proximity? Graves swallowed, then said, I was fulfilling my duty. The harp is central to the household's life. It was my responsibility. Viscount Quilford shifted his weight, stepping forward. Monsieur Poirot, as patron of the music scholarship, I had no reason to touch the harp. I merely attended recitals and provided funding. I might have admired the instrument, but I never requested maintenance or handled strings. He offered a crisp nod. My connection to Signora Marini was solely financial support. Poirot's gaze turned to Lefebvre, whose face had grown ashen. And you, maestro, you possess both the technique to replace a harp string without notice and the artistic knowledge to conceal a vial within its winding. You also had the motive, the promise of a forged will altering your inheritance and the jealousy of Marini's foreign patronage. Explain. Lefebvre's voice was hoarse. Monsieur, I confess my envy and my folly in the study, but I did not kill her. I did not know of any vile vial. My regrets lie in my rivalry, not in her death. A sudden crash from the hallway broke the tension. Inspector Leclerc entered, bearing a sealed envelope. He handed it to Poirot, whose expression remained unreadable. This arrived moments ago by courier, Leclerc said. It bears no return address. Poirot broke the seal and read the single sheet within. He then held it aloft for all to see, a fragment of the harp's original string, neatly wrapped in crimson ribbon, and a scrawled message. Not all your little grey cells can catch the muse of betrayal. The crimson ribbon was identical to the one on Lefebvre's piano bench, used to tie his sheet music. Lefebvre's colour drained entirely. He sank into a chair, eyes wide. This is madness. Someone seeks to frame me further. Poirot's eyes flickered with a rare intensity, or to provoke you into action you might regret. He turned to the group. Note how this instrument of intimidation shifts suspicion back onto the pianist. The use of crimson ribbon are personal emblems of an intimate knowledge of his habits. He handed the note to Leclerc. Inspector, this bombshell must be considered. But let us not be swayed by theatrics." He paused, voice soft yet firm. "Tensions rise now in earnest. Alliances will be tested, suspicions inflamed, and truths forced to the surface. Tomorrow we will separate you once more and observe who seeks the solace of innocence and who falls further into the trap of deception." He folded his hands and faced Lefebvre. "For now, monsieur, I advise discretion and composure. The next hour will reveal whether you stand upon the precipice of despair or of confession." As Poirot drew the curtains and the assembled company dispersed under a pall of unease, I noted that shifting glances exchanged among them. The crimson ribbon, the anonymous threat each, would magnify the pressure closing in on Monsieur Lefebvre and those who had aided him. The house pulsed with apprehension, promising that by the next dawn, one or more of the little grey cells in Delacroix Manor would crack under the strain of guilt. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the drawing-room, casting long shafts of light across its polished floorboards. The household had been summoned once more, each suspect more pallid than before, their composure stretched thin by Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Lady Delacroix sat near the hearth, her posture rigid in black silk. Cecily hovered at her side, fingers entwined. Mrs. Penrose stood by the window, her face pinched with worry. Viscount Quelford leaned against a bookcase, arms crossed. Edward Graves waited by the door, shoulders hunched. And Monsieur Lefebvre, the pianist, reclined uneasily on a chaise, long eyes darting from one face to another. Poirot rose from his chair, the wooden box containing the old flat string cradled in his hands. He surveyed the circle with his customary serenity, though the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. "Madame et messieurs," he began in measured tones, "we have reached the moment of confrontation. You have endured psychological tests, false leads, hidden connections, and secret clues. Now, I shall present the culmination of evidence against the one among you whose little grey cells have conspired most cunningly." He placed the box on a small table and lifted the string for all to see. "Here is the instrument of Signor Marini's demise, an ampule so finely concealed that it shattered only upon the final chord. The lavender thread was a red herring, the poison in the wine a diversion. The whisper of the will's forgery misled us toward inheritance, yet the core of the crime remains the harp itself. Monsieur Lefebvre, you possess the skill to replace a harp string, the knowledge to wrap an ampule in thread, and the motive derived from both jealousy and the promise of a forged will." Lefebvre's face drained of colour. He rose, voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I admitted my envy, but not this horror. I never intended her death." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet you did intend to prepare the string in advance. You practiced its replacement during rehearsal, when Signora Marini's focus was on her music, not on a silent killer. You tested the stiffness of the C-pedal. You noted the A-flat's position. Only one who had daily access to the harp and who knew Signora Marini's technique could execute such a plan without detection." Lefebvre glanced at the harp, eyes wild. "I tuned her instrument often in performance, but always to aid her, never to harm." "Then explain," Poirot pressed, "why, when I produced the fragments of that glass ampule from the draft of the forged will, you flinched. You know those shards matched those on the hearth, and yet you supplied the parchment, the ink, the quill. You wrapped the draft and the string in the same motion, did you not?" A harsh intake of breath. Lefebvre's moustache twitched. He looked at Lady Delacroix. I found the draft unsigned and intended to persuade her mother to sign it. No more. It was an attempt to secure my future, not a blueprint for murder. Poirot's eyes glimmered. An unsigned draft cannot kill. Only a broken ampule can. You held the old string. You carried it to be replaced. You witnessed the final chord beneath which death lay hidden. And yet you left evidence of your presence. The cognac-scented oil residue, the tiny spiral of your crimson ribbon, the quill-ink smudge on the switchboard, the very implements you used. He tapped the table. You also staged the note threatening you, to shift suspicion further. But you underestimated the endurance of a true detective's gaze. Lefebvre clutched the chaise's armrest. It was meant to be a prank on myself. A device to corner me into confession of the will forgery, not for true malice. I planned to replace the ampule with an inert vial at the last moment only. I never found the chance. Poirot arched an eyebrow. A prank. And how did you intend to remove the inert vial without arousing suspicion when the old string had already been coiled with the poison? You had but one opportunity before the recital, yet you admit you delayed, waiting for a moment that never came. Lefebvre's breathing grew shallow. There was. There was no moment. I panicked when she collapsed sooner than I expected. I fled the room, planning to retrieve the vial and destroy the evidence. But when I returned, his voice broke as he met Poirot's unflinching stare. The string had already done its work. Poirot's expression softened for the briefest instant, and in your panic, you left the fractured ampule at the hearth, the broken string coiled upon the bench, and the oil residue on the metal traces you believed only you could recognize. But I recognized them, monsieur. Lefebvre sank back, onto the chaise head in his hands. I never meant to kill her. She was my rival, yes, but also my friend. I sought only to frighten her into relinquishing the patronage, but it backfired. Intent matters little in the face of death, Poirot said quietly, yet your remorse now is genuine, and for that you shall answer to the law. Inspector Leclerc, you may place Monsieur Lefebvre under arrest for the murder of Signora Marini, and for the forgery of Lady Delacroix's will. Leclerc stepped forward, cuffs in hand, while Graves and Mrs. Penrose watched in silent relief. Viscount Quelford exhaled as though released from a great tension, and Lady Delacroix rose to embrace her daughter. Cecily wept softly, burying her face in her mother's skirts. As Leclerc led Lefebvre away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Poirot turned to me. Mon ami, the confrontation has revealed both method and motive. The truth of human frailty, envy, desperation, fear was laid bare. And in the end, the harp's final note spoke with deadly clarity. I nodded, though my heart ached for the fallen pianist. Truly, Poirot, your little grey cells have triumphed once more. He placed a comforting hand on my arm. Yes, Hastings, but let us remember that behind every crime lies a shattered dream. Now, we must see that justice is served gently, and that in time, wounds may begin to heal. He paused, gaze returning to the silent harp, and after that, the closing remark. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the manor lay in uneasy silence the night following Monsieur Lefebvre's arrest, as if its walls themselves braced for another shock. In the hours past midnight, only the soft click of the grandfather clock and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the stillness. I awoke at an abrupt knock upon my door and found Inspector Leclerc, his expression grave. "Hastings," he whispered, "Monsieur Lefebvre has vanished from his locked quarters." His guard was found unconscious in the corridor, clutching this. He held up a length of crimson ribbon, identical to the one we'd seen on the piano bench. My heart pounded. He must have overpowered the guard and fled. We must alert Poirot. Leclerc nodded. He headed toward the west wing. I fear what he might do next. We hurried through the shadowed corridors, torches flickering on the stone walls. As we passed the study door, still secured, we heard the faintest scrape of movement beyond. Poirot emerged from a side passage, his face pinched but determined. Mon ami Hastings, you have news. I related Lefebvre's disappearance and the ribbon found with the guard. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He seeks to destroy the final proof for to flee by carriage. Come. We followed him swiftly to the music room. The door was ajar, and inside, the harp stood in moonlit silhouette. On the floor lay the broken string, now collected as evidence, but beyond it. A small wooden crate lay overturned, its contents emptied. Poirot knelt and examined the floor. He has taken the old ambulant fragments. He hopes to eradicate the method and thus the proof of his guilt. Leclerc drew his torch close. Beside the crate, footprints led toward the grand staircase. Poirot rose. Then we must pursue before he exits the grounds. Hastings, see to the servants. Block the outer doors. Inspector, rally the guards. I shall follow the echo of his steps. As Leclerc hurried away, I sprinted down the corridor to marshal the household staff. By the time I returned, Poirot stood alone before the closed door of the west wing corridor. Listening intently, he went this way, Poirot said softly, stepping forward. I lifted the lantern high as we advanced. At the corridor's end, we found the doors to the terrace swung wide, revealing the manicured grounds bathed in silver moonlight. Footprints pressed into the dewy gravel led toward the stables. Poirot strode after them, his frock coat brushing the stones. He aims for the stables, where the carriage is kept. He plans to steal a horse, no doubt the mare, Signora Marini, admired yesterday. We burst into the stables to find the great grey mare saddled, its reins drawn taut. Lefebvre stood before her, his face gaunt with desperation, the crate at his feet. In his hand gleamed the old flat string, coiled tightly with broken glass fragments. Stop, Poirot called, drawing himself up to full height. Lefebvre froze, finger poised to tuck the string into his coat. Leclerc and 2 constables arrived, with drawn pistols. Put down the string and step away from the horse, Leclerc ordered. Lefebvre's shoulders sagged. He sank to his knees, placing the string on the ground. I could not bear the disgrace. I thought if I destroyed the evidence, I might reclaim my dignity. Poirot approached quietly. Dignity is not won by erasure of crime, but by acceptance of consequences. He gestured to the shattered vial fragments now strewn across the stall floor. You see, monsieur, how irreparable damage has been done, regardless of removal attempts. Lefebvre bowed his head. I see it now. I see that no escape can undo my actions. He looked at the grey mare, gently stroking its neck. I only wanted to vanish from the scene away from shame. Inspector, Leclerc cuffed him once more. You will return to your quarters until morning, when formal charges will be laid. As we escorted Lefebvre back through the corridors, Poirot paused at the music room door. He retrieved the original broken string, fragments from his pocket, and laid them back upon the crate. Leave it here, Hastings, he instructed. Let the evidence stand as testament to truth's endurance. I nodded, placing the fragments carefully upon the overturned crate. The harp's silent strings seemed somehow soothed by their presence, as though the instrument itself acknowledged justice served. Outside, The first hints of dawn glimmered across the east sky. Inside, Poirot turned to me, eyes bright yet solemn. A desperate attempt to escape, mon ami, but one more ill-fated move in a game he could never win. Tomorrow we shall gather the household for the final pieces to fall into place. He gave a slight bow. Now, Hastings, let us ensure all remains secure. With that, we left the stables, the grey mare watching us with gentle eyes, and returned to the manor where, at last, in the early dawn, a fragile peace descended upon Delacroix Manor. The trap had closed, and no strand of deceit remained unravaged. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The dawn was pale as mist when Poirot roused me for our final inquiry. "Hastings," he said quietly, "the time has come to assemble the last fragment of this puzzle. We must revisit the study and the gallery, for there lies the concluding link between crime and consequence." I nodded, my mind still heavy. With the events of the night, Lefebvre's desperate flight, the shattered ampule in the stables, and the gathering storm of suspense that still clung to Delacroix Manor, we entered the study together, Inspector Leclerc at our side, as the servants filed out with weary expressions. The lunchtime sun cast long, pale bars of light across the disorderly desk, where the silver offering box sat locked and empty. Poirot surveyed the room with deliberate calm, his eyes resting on the grand portrait of Lord Delacroix, high upon the wall. "There," he murmured, stepping toward the painting. Beneath the gilt frame, he traced a faint seam running along the wood panelling. "Observe, Hastings, a concealed panel. I noticed this yesterday when I held the magnifying glass." To the frame's edge, he slipped his hand behind the thick canvas and produced a small iron key. From his waistcoat pocket he drew a note Lefebvre's own admission of forging the draft will, in which he mentioned where he had hidden the original. Not the folly of a master criminal, Poirot smiled wryly, but the carelessness of a desperate rival. With a quiet click, the panel swung inward to reveal a narrow safe embedded in the wall, its door etched with Lady Delacroix's family crest. Poirot fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism gave a soft sigh, and the door opened to expose a sheaf of papers tied with a ribbon of deep burgundy. He lifted the bundle reverently. The original will of Lady Madeleine Delacroix, signed and witnessed, intact as of only yesterday afternoon. "Here lies the true instrument of inheritance," Poirot intoned, placing the documents upon the desk. Lady Delacroix, who had been summoned quietly to the doorway, stepped forward with trembling hands. "My will," she whispered. "It is safe from forgery," Poirot agreed. "And now from the designs of Monsieur Lefebvre," he gestured to the signed and witnessed pages. "This will confirm your intentions, the estate to your daughter, generous provisions to your loyal staff and to Signor Bellini's charitable foundation, and no mention of Monsieur Lefebvre's piano collection." He looked up at Lady Delacroix. "This, madame, restores the order you intended." Lady Delacroix exhaled, relief softening her features. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, how can I ever thank you?" He inclined his head. "Your gratitude is unnecessary. It is justice, not thanks, that we seek." He then turned to Inspector Leclerc. "Inspector, with this will returned to its rightful place, the matter of forgery may be formally closed alongside Monsieur Lefebvre's other offences." Leclerc nodded briskly. "Indeed, I shall ensure it is entered into evidence and returned to Lady Delacroix's safekeeping." Poirot then addressed me, voice low. "Hastings, we have one remaining task. The sequence of events demands a precise timeline to confirm that Signora Marini's death could not have been accelerated by the poison in wine. Since the ampule's aerosol was sufficient, we must review the servants' logs, the timepieces, and the music room's clock to confirm her moment of collapse. Together we examined the minute hand of the ornate clock perched atop the mantel. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he noted the slight advancement beyond the ivied dial's usual click. 1 minute past 7, he murmured. She struck the final chord at precisely 7 o'clock. The ampule shattered then, and she collapsed almost immediately. He tapped his watch. The coroner's estimate of time of death. O2 was impeccable. He then turned to Lady Delacroix. Madame, with this timeline and the discovery of your will, you have closure. Your estate's future is secured, and the woman who sought to change its course has been unmasked. Lady Delacroix pressed the papers to her chest. My daughter's future and the livelihoods of all who serve here are safe. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. She turned to Cecily, whose eyes shone with gratitude and sorrow. Come, ma chère, let us leave this place of shadows. As they departed, Poirot and I exchanged a knowing glance. He closed the study door gently and retrieved Lefebvre's forged draft from the wastebasket, placing it beside the authentic will. The counterfeit alongside the genuine, he observed, is a fitting monument to the duplicity we have unravelled. We left the study and walked the gallery in silence, passing portraits that seemed to observe our passage with quiet approval. At the far end, Poirot paused before the violin bust near the front entrance. He tapped the marble plinth. Now that every piece has fallen into place, the method, the motive, the misdirection, and the genuine will, we may prepare for the final gathering. I nodded. Shall we inform the household? Not yet, Poirot said, eyes alight. First, a brief review of the evidence at my table. Then we shall summon all to the drawing-room at 9:30. There I shall reconstruct the crime from court to confession. As we returned to study, Poirot placed the genuine and forged wills side by side, along with the broken ampule fragments, the harvested harp-string, the crimson ribbon, and the cognac-scented oil residue. He arranged them with meticulous care, as though preparing an exhibit for a connoisseur. These, he said, sweeping his hand across the evidence, are the final notes of our symphony. Each item plays its part: the ampule for death, the thread for misdirection, the ribbon for threat, and the wills for inheritance. Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall conduct the final exposition exposing the culprit's deceit and restoring harmony to Delacroix Manor. I watched him, admiration and relief mingling within me. The final piece had indeed fallen into place, and the little grey cells had triumphed once more. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering by 9:30. The drawing-room was aglow with lamplight and expectant faces. The heavy velvet drapes had been drawn, and the fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the polished floor. At Poirot's request, every servant and guest assembled. Lady Delacroix, pale yet resolute. Cecily, trembling, but composed. Mrs. Penrose, anxious. Edward Graves, stoic. Viscount Quilford, watchful. And even Inspector Leclerc, notebook in hand. A single chair remained empty. Monsieur Lefebvre was confined under guard, awaiting formal proceedings. Stood before the mantel, his small form dwarfed by the grand portrait of Lord Delacroix. On a low table beside him lay the assembled evidence, the broken ampule fragments in a glass dish, the older flat string coiled in its wooden box, the genuine will beside the forged draft, the lavender thread and the crimson ribbon, and a small vial of the cognac-scented lubrication oil. Madame et Messieurs, he began, his voice measured and calm, you have endured a symphony of misdirection and revelation. Tonight, we conclude our overture with the final gathering. He gestured to the evidence. Allow me first to revisit the crimes in their true order. He picked up the glass dish containing the glittering shards. Here is our instrument of death, a tiny glass ampule concealed within the winding of a harp string. At the final chord of Signora Marini's recital, the vibrations shattered this vessel, dispersing an odorless poison into the air. The victim collapsed within seconds, no wound, no taste, no suspicion. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Poirot then lifted the coiled string. The old flat string was replaced under innocent pretense of maintenance. Only one person among us possessed the skill to conduct such a replacement undetected, and the opportunity to do so. Monsieur Marcel Lefebvre. He fixed Lefebvre's empty chair with a steady gaze. The same gentleman whose intimate familiarity with keyboard and harpsichord mechanics extended to secret knowledge of hollow string windings. A soft murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand. Yet method alone does not convict. We must consider motive. He placed the string down and reached for the forged will. This draft, the counterfeit of Lady Delacroix's testament, bore intent to bestow her entire music collection and the estate. To Monsieur Lefebvre, he forged these pages using your own quill and sepia ink, monsieur. He looked to Levers' assigned guard, as though inviting confirmation. The guard merely nodded. Poirot turned to the genuine will. Here lies the authentic document, secured in the concealed safe. It bequeaths the estate to Cecily, with provisions to the staff and to Signor Bellini's foundation. No mention of Monsieur Lefebvre's name. Our pianist's dreams of inheritance were dashed, and in his despair he sought vengeance. He then pointed to the lavender thread. This red herring suggested entry from beyond the window, implicating Miss Cecily. Yet it was cut from Lady Delacroix's own scarf, placed to deflect suspicion. He lifted the crimson ribbon. This, too, sought to shift blame staged after Monsieur Lefebvre's arrest, to rekindle doubt and possibly provoke a repeat act. He turned, addressing the Viscount. Your family's financial straits made you quick to suspect the missing will. Yet your own endowment and the threatened expansion of Lady Delacroix's gardens formed a separate motive of land and influence. Quilford's eyes flickered, but he remained silent. Poirot then held the small vial of oil. Finally, the residue on the broken stringer lubrication oil laced with cognac aroma. This compound is exclusive to Monsieur Lefebvre's piano maintenance. Confirming his hands alone touched the fatal string. He replaced the vial, allowing the evidence to speak its truth. He folded his slender fingers. Thus, method and motive converge upon one man. But consider also the corruption of trust. Mrs. Penrose's secrecy over Signora Marini's romance, Edward Graves's unwitting delivery of the string, Lady Delacroix's confidence, and Cecily's unwitting glaval, entwined in the murderer's design. He looked at each in turn, their eyes heavy with relief that none but Lefebvre stood accused. Poirot's tone then softened. Now, monsieur, he said, turning sharply to the empty seat, will you stand and explain why you combined envy, desperation, and artistry into this deadly concerto? At that moment Inspector Leclerc opened the door and ushered in Monsieur Lefebvre, gaunt and weary, cuffed but dignified. He rose unsteadily, the single overhead lamp highlighting the guilt etched in his features. Lefebvre's voice was hollow. I admit it, Monsieur Poirot. In my arrogance, I believed I could control every note, every outcome. I forged the will to secure my future. When that failed, I sought retribution upon the harp, the very symbol of Signora Marini's triumph over me. His shoulders slumped. I did not intend to kill her only to frighten her, but in my haste I overlooked the fragility of glass and of life. A quiet sigh passed through the room. Lady Delacroix rose and approached, face pale but resolute. "Marcel," she said softly, "had you spoken to me, I might have found a way to help you without bloodshed." He bowed his head. "Forgive me, lady. My pride drowned me in madness." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Forgiveness may come. In time, monsieur, but justice must now take its course." He turned to Inspector Leclerc. "You may conduct Monsieur Lefebvre to the station, where he will await trial." Leclerc stepped forward and gently escorted Lefebvre out, the pianist's face a mask of regret. As the door closed, Poirot surveyed the assembly once more. "Messieurs," he concluded, "the little grey cells have triumphed, not by force, but by harmony of reason and compassion. We have restored the will to its rightful place, and unmasked a deadly deception. May Delacroix Manor henceforth know only music, nevermore its fatal final note." A soft round of relieved applause arose, mingled with tears and quiet embraces. Lady Delacroix turned to Poirot, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Monsieur, you have saved my daughter's future and my peace of mind." Poirot smiled gently, bowing. "Madame, it was my privilege. My work here is done except for the closing remark." He gave a small, knowing nod to me, and together we stepped back into the now tranquil night, leaving Delacroix Manor to heal under the watchful gaze of its silent tharp. Chapter 16. The Revealers. The dawn's first light crept through the tall windows of Delacroix Manor. I found Hercule Poirot arranging his notes upon the small side table in the drawing-room. The assembled household, Lady Delacroix, Cecily, Mrs. Penrose, Edward Graves, and Viscount Quilford breezed in after a subdued breakfast, each bearing a look of anxious expectation. Even Inspector Leclerc returned early, driven by the promise of Poirot's final exposition. Poirot stood, smoothing his immaculate frock-coat, and surveyed the group. "Madame et messieurs, now comes the moment for clarity. We have identified the perpetrator, but the nature of the deception demands that we retrace each step, showing how subtle misdirection nearly obscured the truth. Let us begin." He lifted the broken ampule fragments. "Here we have the tiny vessel of glass, filled with an odorless poison. Concealed within the winding of the flat string, it shattered at the precise moment Signora Marini played her final chord. The aerosol inhaled was fatal within seconds. Observe how the crushed glass in these fragments matches identically those found in the wastebasket draft of the forged will. Proof that both crimes were prepared by the same hand." Lady Delacroix's fingers tightened around Cecily's hand. Mrs. Penrose blinked back tears. Graves and Quilford watched with solemn expressions. Poirot continued. "Next, the harp string itself. A freshly replaced A-flat string was delivered under the guise of routine maintenance, ordered by Edward Graves, at the express wish of Signora Marini, who complained of slight looseness. The murderer exploited this opportunity, replacing the new string with one containing the ampule, and then restored the genuine string coil aside to avoid immediate suspicion. He placed the coiled string in its wooden box. This deception would have remained concealed, had not a thread of lavender caught on the window drape intended to suggest an intruder. Entry prompting suspicion of Cecilia Delacroix. Yet that wool was cut from Lady Delacroix's own scarf, proving the ruse originated within the house. Turning to Mrs. Penrose, Poirot's manner softened. "Madame, your payments to Signora Marini for discretion over her personal affairs created a convenient distraction, but you were not party to the instrument of death. Your ledger inadvertently revealed the existence of Signor Bellini's stipend, explaining the harpist's financial independence. That independence threatened our culprit's plan for forged inheritance." He then addressed Viscount Quilford. "Your generous endowment and the threatened expansion of Lady Delacroix's gardens suggested a financial motive, yet you neither handled the string nor possessed the technical knowledge. Your suspicion was a natural reaction to missing Landa. Red herring, not the crime's core." Poirot picked up the forged draft will. Here, the intent to change Lady Delacroix's testament to benefit Monsieur Marcel Lefebvre. He forged this document using her quill and ink, planning to secure the estate and music collection. The signature line was left blank, perhaps out of haste, or perhaps to gauge his mother's acquiescence. His eyes fixed on Lady Delacroix. "Madame, this draft contravened your wishes, and its disappearance from the safe was our secondary crime meant to manipulate inheritance." He set down the draft with care. "Monsieur Lefebvre, it was you who possessed the combination of motives en vie of Signora Marini's Venetian patronage, desperation for security, and an artist's understanding of string mechanics. You used your piano maintenance oil to that found on the broken string to lubricate the winding and conceal the ampule. You placed the crimson ribbon, a personal emblem, to threaten yourself after arrest, hoping to reinstate suspicion on others." At Poirot's words, Monsieur Lefebvre, escorted by Leclerc, entered the room, shoulders slumped. He met Poirot's gaze with resigned sorrow. Poirot gestured to the pianist's seat. "Monsieur Lefebvre, please sit so that you might hear the truth laid bare." Lefebvre sank into the chaise, long eyes downcast. Poirot approached and spoke. "Gently, you admitted your envy to Signora Marini's triumphs. You resented her foreign patronage and felt overshadowed at every recital. In your moment of weakness, you conceived a plan to frighten her into relinquishing her Venetian stipendian. Affront to your pride." He paused. "But when you fashioned the hidden ampule, you did not anticipate that the poison would claim her so swiftly." A soft sob escaped Cecily's lips, and Lady Delacroix placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Poirot's voice remained calm. "You thought this would be but a delaying tactica terror that would send her fleeing. Instead, you delivered a death sentence." He lifted his hand to lift Lefebvre's chin, forcing him to meet the group's eyes. "In this moment, you are alone facing the consequences of a crime born of pride and forgery." Lefebvre's voice was barely audible. "No excuse can undo my crime. I beg your forgiveness, Signora Delacroix, for the loss of your devoted harpist." Lady Delacroix's face shone with a mixture of grief and grace. "I forgive you, Marcel, for you have shown remorse, but forgiveness does not absolve justice." Poirot bowed his head. "Indeed. Inspector Leclerc, will you proceed with Monsieur Lefebvre's formal reading of charges?" Leclerc nodded and stepped forward, reciting the count of murder and forgery. As he did so, the pianist closed his eyes, accepting the inevitable. Poirot turned to the remaining members of the household. "Let this serve as a caution that in the world of music, as in life, harmony must never be sacrificed for personal gain. The little grey cells may notice a single discordant note, but they delight in restoring the symphony to its true form." He took a breath and allowed a small smile to grace his lips. And now, Miss Amis, our final movement awaits outcome and justice, but that shall follow in due course. With a gentle nod, he signaled the conclusion of the reveal. The atmosphere, once taut with tension, softened into solemn relief as the household absorbed the full measure of truth. Thus ended the grand reveal, where every suspicion found confirmation, every motive was laid bare, and the true culprit faced exposure under the unring light of Poirot's reasoning. The stage was set for the ultimate resolution, justice served, and the manor's harmony restored. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. In the days that followed Monsieur Lafabe's arrest, Delacroix Manor settled into a subdued routine. The grand corridors, once echoing with whispered suspicions, now carried a softer cadence of hushed condolences, gentle steps, and the measured strokes of a new harpist rehearsing in the music room. News of the pianist's trial circulated in polite society, yet within these walls the matter was personal. The loss of a friend, the restoration of a family's trust, and the fragile healing of hearts once rent by betrayal. Early on a crisp morning, Inspector Leclerc arrived to oversee the formal transfer of evidence and to escort the original will back to Lady Delacroix's safe. Poirot accompanied him through the gallery, where portraits of ancestors watched solemnly. Inside the study, Poirot laid the will, the forged draft, and the shattered ampule fragments side by side on the desk. Leclerc nodded approvingly. Everything is accounted for, Monsieur Poirot. The Crown's case is now irrefutable. He lifted the signed will. This shall be placed in the county registry today. Lady Delacroix's wishes will stand. Poirot inclined his head. Justice must be both served and seen to be served. The law will now take its course with clear conscience, unburdened by uncertainty. He closed the desk drawer, ensuring the will's safety. Across the lawn, Cecily Delacroix practiced scales on the newly restrung harp. The young woman's pale fingers moved with steady confidence, as though reclaiming the instrument's voice for hope rather than horror. Lady Delacroix watched from the veranda, her dark silk gown replaced by a softer grey afternoon dress. I stood beside her, offering silent support. She plays beautifully, I remarked. Lady Delacroix smiled, a small, bittersweet gesture. Yes, Signora Marini's student has inherited not only her technique, but her spirit. I find solace in every note Cecily draws from the strings. She paused, gaze distant. And yet I mourn the loss of a friend, one whose talent transcended mere music. I nodded, understanding that justice could not erase grief. Monsieur Lefebvre's remorse was genuine, madame. His punishment will follow the law, but perhaps his contrition will ease your sorrow. She folded her hands. I have instructed my solicitor to petition for a fair sentence, given his repentance. But one cannot undo death. She let out a quiet sigh, then added with quiet resolve, I will honor Signora Marini's memory by expanding the scholarship to young harpists and by establishing an annual concert in her name. Later that afternoon, the household gathered in the library, the familiar scene of initial interviews and late-night debates to mark the passing of Signora Marini. Mrs. Penrose, her eyes red but firm, distributed small white flowers for each attendee to place in a crystal vase upon the mantel. Edward Graves lit a single white candle beside her portrait, and Viscount Quilford offered a brief, sincere tribute to the harpist's artistry. Even Inspector Leclerc paused in his duties to pay respects, offering a nod of solemn respect before returning to his official work. Poirot, seated in his favourite armchair, watched the proceedings with quiet pride. When the last flower had been laid, he rose gracefully. Let us observe a moment of silence for Marie-Thérèse Marini, whose final note resonates in our hearts. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of shared loss. The group bowed heads. The silence that followed felt sacred, as the first soft strains of a new harpist's melody drifted from the music room. An elegy woven from pure tonai caught Poirot's eye. He offered a small nod, acknowledging both the sorrow of absence and the promise of renewal. That evening, a letter arrived for Lady Delacour from Signor Bellini in Venice. In elegant script, he conveyed his deep condolences and pledged continued support for the newly established scholarship. He enclosed a generous endowment, ensuring that Signora Marini's legacy would flourish for generations. Lady Delacour read the letter aloud in the drawing-room, her voice trembling with gratitude. She turned to the assembled staff and family. Her patron lives on in memory and in deed. Over the next week, the trial of Marcel Lefebvre commenced at the county courthouse. Poirot and Leclerc attended as witnesses, delivering their testimonies with precision. The forensic evidence, the shards of glass, the oil residue, the string mechanics proved irrefutable. Lefebvre, remorseful and dignified, received a sentence tempered by his voluntary confession and his emotional breakdown. He was to serve a term in a secure facility, with provision for medical and psychological support and outcome, neither wholly punitive nor unduly lenient. Back at Delacour Manor, the daily rhythms resumed: meals in the bright sunroom, afternoon walks along the boxwood maze, and evening recitals by Cecily at the harp. Lady Delacour, once burdened by fear and betrayal, began to smile again softly, in quiet moments of remembrance and in the shared joy of music's return. She invited me to join her on the terrace one evening as the sun dipped behind the hills. "How fares your friend, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, glancing at the drawing-room window where he sat lost in thought over a chessboard. I smiled. "Mon cher ami remains in fine form, Madame Ben, even on a case of profound sorrow. His little grey cells find satisfaction in restored harmony." I paused. "He will soon depart for London, but not before attending a private recital in memory of Signora Marini." Lady Delacour's eyes shone. "I would be honoured if you and Monsieur Poirot would preside." She rested a hand on Cecily's shoulder as the young woman approached with a sheet of new musican, original composition in tribute to her mentor, tentatively titled Marie-Thérèse Lament. In the weeks that followed, Delacour Manor transformed grief into grace. The harp's strings, now precisely tuned, sang with renewed purpose. The scholarship drew talented students from across Europe, their fresh melodies weaving a tapestry of hope. Mrs. Penrose managed the household with quiet dignity, her loyalty rewarded by Lady Delacour's personal gratitude. Edward Graves resumed his duties with measured respect, his devotion undiminished by the butler's brief fall from grace. On a gentle spring morning, as cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow across the courtyard, Poirot prepared to depart. We stood in the portico, trunks at the ready. Lady Delacour and Cecily bid farewell with warm embraces, while Mrs. Penrose, Graves, and even Viscount Quilford gathered to express their thanks. The once tensed household now radiated unity and respect. Poirot bowed deeply to Lady Delacour. "I am grateful for your hospitality and for the privilege of serving justice." He turned to Cecily. "Mademoiselle, continue to nurture the harp's song. Your music shall honour Signora Marini's spirit forever." Cecily's eyes brimmed with tears of gratitude. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I will. As Poirot and I stepped into the carriageman snapped the reins. The horses trotted forward, and Delacroix Manor receded into the distance, its silhouette softened by morning light. Poirot leaned back, eyes closed as if listening to an unseen score. Hastings, this case has reminded us that human hearts can harbour both beauty and darkness, but justice, when pursued with compassion and precision, restores the balance. He opened his eyes and offered a serene smile. Now, mon ami, we journey home, our work here is done. And so, with the manor behind us and the promise of new melodies ahead, we set forth into the sunlit road, the echoes of a final chapter, lingering like the last, perfect chord of a masterfully crafted concerto. Chapter 18. The closing remarkers. The carriage rolled away from Delacroix Manor. The morning air carried the faint strains of Cecily's harp echoing through the gardens, a testament to renewal and remembrance. Across the rolling fields and winding lanes, Hercule Poirot sat with his little grey cells at ease, his posture relaxed yet mindful of every nuance of the world beyond the window. Mon ami, I ventured after a reflective silence, this case tested us with misdirection, enmity, and sorrow. Yet through each twist, you guided us to truth. Poirot inclined his head, the corners of his mouth curving in gentle satisfaction. Indeed, Hastings, but recall, a mystery is like a concerto, composed of many movements. Each clue is a note, each motive a motif. Only by attending to every measure can the finale resonate with justice. I considered his words as we entered a shaded copse, the sun dappling through spring leaves, and justice was served with mercy, too. Monsieur Lefebvre's remorse was genuine, and Lady Delacour's compassion lent grace to the verdict. Compassion is the masterstroke of any true detective, Poirot agreed. For the little grey cells serve not only to uncover guilt, but also to restore harmony where discord has fallen. He paused, gazing at a distant church steeple emerging through the mist. Now, Hastings, we return to London, where countless other mysteries await. Yet I shall carry the notes of Delacroix Manor within its chord of betrayal, its cadence of confession, and its ultimate coda of renewal. The carriage slowed at a crossroads, and I stepped down first, checking the leather of my coat against the rising sun. Poirot followed, offering his arm as always. We bid farewell to our driver and set off toward Baker Street, our minds already dancing through new puzzles. Moments later, as we climbed the dimly lit staircase of 2-1B, the familiar sense of tobacco and old books greeted us. I removed my coat and glanced at Poirot, who was already positioning his beloved violin on its stand. Home, sweet home, I said with a wry smile. Poirot set his bow aside and tapped his flute-like nose. Every ending is but a prelude to another mystery, Hastings. We shall dine, read the morning papers, and prepare our little grey cells for fresh challenges. I fetched 2 cups of tea as Poirot settled into his hub-backed chair, loosening his tie. He accepted a cup with a nod and inhaled its fragrant steam. Ah, Tether, elixir of reflection. Let us drink to Delacroix Manor, to justice served. And 2 friends, both lost and honoured. We sipped in companionable silence. The world beyond our window hummed with life, the clatter of carriage wheels, distant church bells, and the occasional bark of a Northumberland Avenue cab. Within our cosy rooms, peace reigned at last. Poirot set down his cup and regarded me with his keen, reflective gaze. Hastings, Do you recall the final note Signora Marini struck the A-flat that concealed her fate? I nodded. How could I forget? It was the note that called for our hearing, yet brought only silence to her lips. Poirot's eyes glimmered. And so we must listen always, not only for the crash of evidence, but for the quiet echo of subtle truths. For in the world of human conduct, the loudest actions often conceal the softest motives. He rose and walked to the small window, overlooking the London rooftops. I followed, feeling the satisfaction of a case resolved and the anticipation of new adventures. Poirot's silhouette, bathed in morning light, stood a portrait of elegant determination. He turned, hand extended. "Hastings, shall we?" I clasped his hand firmly. "Always, Poirot. To the next case, and beyond." With that, we returned to the hearth, ready to face whatever mysteries awaited us, confident that, so long as we listened with both mind and heart, no deception could elude the little grey cells. And in that steadfast partnership lay the true symphony of justice.